Welcome to Feature Fanatics. I'm your host Gaul, and joining me in the Feature Fanatics lobby is returning guest host and my co-duos trivia champion now, Jacob Cunningham.
Oh, you got to flex. You
Oh
got to
yeah, wait, let me
flex.
get it. Let me go get it.
Yeah, the woefully unprepared for this episode, Jacob Cunningham. But who doesn't love the Giamatti? I'm very excited to talk about him with
Wait,
this
for
man.
for the thumbnail.
My very dusty belt that I need to give a wipe. I think for the new
Yeah,
incoming season. Should we get on to the meat and
yeah,
potatoes of today's episode?
we really should. So today we're talking about a man by the name of Paul Edward Valentine Giamatti. That's his full name,
Was the
according to
pause for
Wikipedia.
dramatic effect, or for you to look up the full name?
For me to look up the name. I forgot about this, but he was in My Best Friend's Wedding. He was in Man on the Moon in the 90s. And that was just the first um, real big decade of his career. After that, he was in a lot of movies I haven't seen, but Jacob will tell you more about. He's a two-time Academy Award nominee, possibly upgrading that status soon. He's won 3 Golden Globes. He's a Critics' Choice winner. He's an Emmy winner, and best of all, he has our hearts. So to start this episode off, our actor showreel. Why do we love Mr. Paul Giamatti?
He's a guy I feel like we all took for granted for a while, myself included. And so it is really wonderful that that's not to say he's like some obscure actor or anything, but like the holdovers, it has really like it's given him his flowers. It's giving him his moment in the sun. Whether or not he takes home that Oscar at the end of the day, he is fully in the forefront. I've got friends who aren't cinephiles out there talking about Paul Giamatti. A lot of people grew up with him in a certain film that I cannot believe Gull hasn't seen, that I'll talk about in a minute. He's such a lovable guy, and he plays a lot of sleazeballs and villains, but he's also played a lot of lovable figures and guys who are not conventional looking leading men who can slide into and be believable in any role. Like, you just do an image search of Giamatti's different roles. He always transforms. He always looks different. He's always doing something different. He can transform his voice.
He voiced Turbo's brother in Turbo, the snail movie, which low-key a very fun movie.
Then Rhino, which we don't really talk about, but I mean, I think the big one that we're not really spotlighting today because it's not his film, but how good is he in Straight Outta Compton?
Oh, he's so good.
I feel like him and Jason Mitchell were probably the two in that one that were the closest to getting a supporting actor nomination. They didn't get it, but they're so good in that film. And he plays a lot of, like, a common theme with him is he plays like dodgy manager, mentor type characters, like Straight Outta Compton, Love and Mercy, which we'll talk about. And even Cinderella Man, his character's a bit more on the good side, but he's still quite complex in that regard. But
Straight Outta Compton is
great. Yeah.
Last thing I want to touch on is we talked before, me and you, about the film Robots, which is a childhood classic. He is credited, I did not know this until now, he is credited as the voice of Tim the Gate Guard.
I could not tell you who that is, but I respect that.
Me neither, but do with that what you will. But that's quite a respectable credit to have.
There's one movie that I think, dear listener, would be remiss if we didn't talk about that Gull said he hasn't seen, but Big Fat Liar. It might be the movie that, like, most non-cinephiles know this dude by. It's a 2002 comedy with Frankie Muniz where Paul Giamatti plays this evil film executive called Marty Wolf, and he tries to steal this kid's screenplay, and the film just ends up being a war between them. And the iconic image of him getting dyed blue by Frankie Muniz. It's just, I watched that film so many times as a kid, and it really is, like, genuinely, if I need to explain to someone who Paul Giamatti is, I can usually just use that movie and say, oh yeah, Marty Wolf Pictures.
So yeah, let's get into one of his films that I think, if you would say Paul Giamatti is one of your favorites, it's probably because you saw Sideways, directed by Alexander Payne, which was released in 2004. And in this movie, Paul Giamatti plays a character named Miles, who's an unsuccessful writer and English teacher in, I forget if it's a middle school or high school, but
cannot remember.
Yeah, but he teaches at some school, and then he and his buddy, played by Thomas Hayden Church, go on go on a road trip for some wine tasting as a sort of bachelor trip before Thomas Hayden Church's character's wedding. And I'm not really into the world of wine tasting at all, but we need some positive representation for all corners of culture. So this, according to this film's page, um, this movie drew a lot of attention to the Santa Ynez Valley. I hope I'm saying that right, which is like the wine growing region, and it actually like increased a lot of like sales of, I'm not going to say this right, Pinot Noir,
Pinot
and
Noir,
Merlot. You can tell
and
I'm not a wine
Merlot.
drinker, and you are. But yeah, so there were like studies that like actually figured out that Sideways like had a huge impact on the sales of Pinot Noir, and that like Merlot dropped. Merlot. I'm not even gonna try to Merlot. So yeah, that's, if you wanted to talk about this movie's impact and how it stood the test of time, wine drinkers and enthusiasts are paying attention.
And look, I do drink a bit of Pinot Noir myself. So thanks, Paul Giamatti, for that in this movie I saw like 6 months ago for the first time. Yeah, it's a film. I wouldn't say it's one of my favorite Alexander Payne films, but I would say it's one of my favorite Paul Giamatti performances. And it really is probably the one people look back on the most as like being shocked that he didn't even get an Oscar nomination for that, because he shines through that film. And the two lead characters, I would say they're not so likable, but I think the film knows that and sort of uses that to its own advantage for the most part. And Giamatti, his character in particular, is quite complex. He has all this knowledge in this specific area, but he's also kind of a failure. He's like trying to write a novel, but he can't sell it. So yeah, he's a really interesting and complex character and really perfectly suited to what Giamatti can do. And Hayden Church is great in this too. His character sucks as a person, but he's so charismatic in it.
See, this like boosted my outlook on Thomas Hayden Church as an actor, because he's so funny and hysterical. He was nominated for Best Supporting Actor, as was Virginia Madsen for her performance. Shout out. She's like Paul Giamatti's character's love interest. Sandra Oh was really terrific. I honestly thought she was even better.
She's really charming in that film. Maybe it's a film that gets a bit into the weeds and I wasn't quite as invested in the characters as I maybe should have been for it, but I still quite enjoyed it. I enjoyed hearing all the nitty gritty stuff about wine, even though it's not a world I'm a part of or even particularly interesting. It's always really compelling to see people talk about what they are passionate about. And it's clear that the people behind the camera are really passionate about that too.
As people who aspire to create someday, like, you understand his struggles with trying to get his book out and trying to be accepted in doing something that he cares about.
And only being able to talk to women when they get onto the subject of the one thing he knows about.
Exactly.
Movies.
Exactly. So this movie, first of all, was nominated for Picture, Director, Supporting Actor, Supporting Actress, and Adapted Screenplay. And it
literally everything to Giamatti.
Deservedly so, which very good category that year. Sideways beat Before Sunset, Finding Neverland, $1 Million Baby, which won Best Picture, and The Motorcycle Diaries. All very good films.
I'm cool with Sideways winning that, actually. That's a good lineup.
Yeah,
but
I agree.
I think I'd actually give it... I like some of the other movies better, but I think Sideways deserves screenplay there.
So here's who was nominated. Okay, this is tough. Jamie Foxx and Ray won that year. Don Cheadle for Hotel Rwanda. Johnny Depp for Finding Neverland. Leonardo DiCaprio for The Aviator. And Clint Eastwood for $1 Million Baby. I would have put Paul over Johnny Depp, even though I love his Scottish accent in Finding Neverland. But I'm not as huge on the movie.
Yeah, I haven't seen Cheadle and I haven't seen Ray, which is kind of crazy. I need to get
I just recently saw Ray, and he's really good in it. Hotel Rwanda is also, he's terrific in that.
Yeah, I'd probably agree with the Johnny Depp pick. I really like Finding Neverland, but you could take or leave it, that one.
I watched The Holdovers the second time with my parents, and I mentioned like Paul Giamatti and the director also worked together in Sideways, and she was like, "Oh, I would watch that movie again." So I think it managed to really find a wide appeal. Not to mention, it made over $100 million at the box office.
Oh, I'm still here. No, I was just going to say, I remember I actually have a Pinot Noir right here. I don't know if you can read it, but I have a bottle of Pinot Noir in my cupboard right now. So shout out to Sideways. This is for you, Giamatti.
This also has a stage adaptation. Oh, it has a stage adaptation in the works. for a stage musical. Oh, holy shit! They're making
That's
this into a
crazy.
musical. That's a little far. Like I get Mean Girls, and even The Color Purple, but like Sideways. Okay.
And then will the musical get adapted into a mediocre film as well?
Imagine like who would play like Jacob Elordi as the Thomas Hayden Church character or something.
Jacob
Um,
Elordi as the Giamatti character, full body
that would be amazing.
transformation.
um, so yeah, and this one Alexander Payne, his first of two adapted screenplay Oscar wins, like we said, which he also won for The Descendants. I know you said this isn't one of your favorite Alexander Payne films, but this is actually on my top three of his. I would say I'm not sure if I would. I would say this is either two or three. I would say Holdovers is number one, and then between this and The Descendants for two and three. Where do you put
Yeah.
it?
Holdovers and The Descendants are my favorites. Then Election and Nebraska would probably be the next tier, and then I don't like Downsizing at all. And then Sideways would probably be next to bottom, but I do still quite like it. I just find some of his other movies a bit more emotionally resonant, but Sideways is like really impressively done from a writing and acting standpoint.
I didn't care much for Election, to be honest. And I hated Downsizing. I haven't seen Nebraska, but if I'm thinking now about what I've seen
great.
from Alexander Payne, I think this is definitely one of his defining films, just because it's very singular in its style. Like I feel like the whole like jazz score and the editing really complements the film and making it unique, and just the tone and the writing style. I think this was like just such a great film for him that he managed to top later, in my opinion. But he really just in terms of direction, I think this is one of his stronger pieces. I also really liked About Schmidt, which I just saw a couple weeks ago. Actually,
I haven't seen that, and I haven't seen Citizen Ruth, which I
haven't seen that either. Is that with?
Well.
Oh crap! Who's in that?
Laura Dern.
Oh my god, I did not know this. Before we move on, Alexander Payne was apparently a writer on Jurassic Park 3, uncredited on Meet the Parents, and I now pronounce you Chuck and Larry. How did we not know this?
We all got to pay the bills somehow, man.
I know. I mean, yeah, I can't judge. Let's get into our next Paul Giamatti film. That this was actually his first Oscar nomination, which just a year after missing out for Sideways, he managed to redeem himself by getting nominated for supporting actor for Cinderella Man, directed by Ron Howard.
He knocked on the door with Sideways and they couldn't quite hear him, but he just kept knocking and they finally let him in.
So this is a movie about Jim Braddock, who was a boxer who was dubbed the Cinderella Man because, as it sounds, he was pretty much penniless. He was struggling to feed his family, sustain a home, but he kept risking it all by throwing himself into the ring and eventually became a legendary boxer. It sounds like a very traditional formula, but I think the way that it's in the cinematic aspect of it is invested into, and all the boxing scenes and all the emotion that's put into it, I think it's actually a really great movie.
Yeah, I really love Cinderella Man. I threw it on like 5 years ago and fell asleep 20 minutes in and then didn't go back and finish it for another like 3 years. And then when I did, I loved it. To the point where I would say it is not only one of Ron Howard's best films, but I think it's my favorite Russell Crowe performance, honestly. I know he's got some heavy hitters there, but I think stuff like Gladiator and Romper Stomper doesn't resonate, or even A Beautiful Mind, like is impressive but doesn't resonate. But I think he totally just breaks your heart in this one.
Interestingly enough, neither Russell Crowe nor Renee Zellweger were nominated, even though they were really good. But Paul Giamatti was nominated for supporting actor. The film was nominated for best film editing and best makeup. It was also nominated. I do feel like if the Academy had already had like 10 eligible, this could have gotten in pretty easily. Also it's 2 hours, 25 minutes. I think it actually flows by really well. But again, the production value and how engaging those boxing scenes are, I think manages to carry you through the whole film, and just how much you're able to root for that character. Like he faces off against some like really asshole boxers in the film. But that only makes the journey to get to his eventual success even more fun.
And it's such a great look. Like, it's not just a boxing movie, but a great portrait of that Great Depression period, which we don't really see in a ton of movies, and it's sort of a look at boxing before it was like this huge sport where the guys fighting it still had to have day jobs and like deal with all this other bullshit. So it really like brings a whole new perspective to why people get in the ring. And yeah, like I said, there's a scene where Crow has to beg for money from like all of his crew, and it is it's so heart-wrenching. The apologizes for asking for money, and then Giamatti just says, "Kid, you have nothing to be sorry for."
Yeah, Giamatti, I honestly think steals the show here. Let's get into that, because he plays his coach and his manager Joe Gold, and I thought he was so wonderful, especially when he gets like super into it during the matches. I just loved all his energy and how pissed off he gets. Like that I feel like we could talk about this whole segment.
There's one, I think, after one of the fights where he just like, Jesus Christ, Jesus Christ, Jesus, just yelling at him. Yeah, but he's great. He's also like, he plays like the hustler parts of the role where he's like negotiating
Right.
to organize fights for him and everything. And it's sort of like, yeah, it's kind of in the family of like manager roles of Love and Mercy and stuff, but this one you really kind of do believe he has Braddock's best interests at heart. There are times where maybe he could be exploiting him, but I think it's definitely the most complex out of these sorts of roles that he's done.
He's genuinely there for the guy. He's supportive. He's and he manages to help raise him, which I think we love seeing, like those like really supportive managers, because we're used to a lot of them being like Paul Giamatti's other manager roles.
Also, fun fact, I was reading about the real Joe Gould just before, and apparently he was sentenced to 3 years of hard labor for accepting bribes while he was in the military. So that's fun.
Oh, wow. Imagine if they made like a Joe Gould biopic now.
Joe
like
Gould biopic.
It was like Ford versus Ferrari, and then Ferrari. So imagine if it was like Cinderella Man, Joe Gould.
He had a pretty troubled life, but no, the way the movie uses him is really, really strong, and it's fun. It's definitely like I would say maybe even like top 3 Ron Howard movies for me.
Yeah, I think this is one of his best movies. You know, again, I would still put A Beautiful Mind as his best. I probably prefer Frost Nixon. Damn.
Yeah.
I might even put like Frost Nixon, Rush, and Apollo 13 over this, but you know, that's still top 5 Ron Howard.
Rush is his best movie, absolutely.
I feel like these 2 movies would honestly go really like well as a double feature if you have a good 4.5 hours.
Ron Howard, just keep making sports movies, bro. It's what you're good at. Yeah. So should we move on to the third of our Paul Giamatti spotlights here? Another great biopic, and a film that is often cited, and I would agree, as one of the best music biopics of that 2010s boom of when they were all happening. And that is, of course, Love and Mercy, the film about the Beach Boys and Brian Wilson and all of his emotional troubles looped in with his total musical genius. And we jump back and forth in time as he's played by Paul Dano and John Cusack through the different periods of his life. And through it all is Paul Giamatti as his psychologist, who is completely exploiting him. And it was truly just exacerbated all of the mental problems that Brian Wilson had. And it's a really sad and soulful and totally unique film in that genre.
Yeah, Love and Mercy. I saw this years after it came out. Like I saw it during the pandemic. I just remember being like such a fan because I'd known a sufficient amount of Beach Boys music by the time I watched this movie. I was like 18. I was just really amazed by like, oh my God, how did I miss this? First of all, the pace flows so well, and you're so charmed by the way the film flows, but it's also really powerful. You know, Paul Dano, he was nominated for the Golden Globe for supporting actor for this film. It's probably one of his best performances, I would say. Honestly, I think Cusack's at least as good as Dano because it's one of his most human performances, one of his most like unapologetically vulnerable.
We don't get a ton of roles like that from him nowadays, so it's great to just see that he's still got it. Although he hasn't really done much since, but he's really excellent in this.
This is a trend in 2015 where Paul Giamatti plays a famous artist's corrupt
Manipulator.
manager
Yeah.
who's taking advantage. So on this one, I think at the start of this one, he's a lot more trustworthy. Like he seems like he's like his doctor, who's basically his conservator now. And at first it seems like he has John Cusack, Brian Wilson's best interests at heart. But as the movie goes by, he just becomes increasingly harsh towards him, starts yelling increasingly, and you can see that he's just sadistically manipulating this guy.
There was stories from the first screenings of the movie that the real Brian Wilson had to leave the theater because those scenes reminded him so much of the real guy, which is, I guess,
Let's get his
really
name right. Dr. Eugene Landy.
But really sad for Wilson there, but also a testament to how strong Giamatti is in that role and how he can so quickly flick that switch between trustworthy and terrifying. And I also saw a quote from one of Wilson's relatives that they said, as bad as he's portrayed in the movie, the real guy was even worse.
Wow. I mean, I think this movie's rated R. I'm not sure, but like, I'm sure. Oh, it's PG-13. Oh, I didn't realize that. Yeah, so I guess you would have had to make this rated R in order to show like all the cursing he probably
stuff. Yeah, but speaking of actors who is crazy they haven't gotten Oscar nominations. The fact that Paul Dano is not yet an Oscar nominee is just this should have been his first Oscar nomination. I think he was pretty close in the conversation. I
feel like he was close. That was a big year. We had. Was it Christian Bale, Mark Ruffalo, Mark Rylance, Sylvester Stallone, and Tom Hardy nominated that year? And there were so many that
Tom Hardy should have won that year. I might add.
I agree. Tom Hardy definitely should have won that year for The Revenant.
Everybody was like, Sylvester should have won. Oh, Mark Rylance shouldn't have won. No, it should have been Tom Hardy. You're both wrong.
And Jacob's right. I do agree with that. There were a couple people that year, like Paul Dano for Love and Mercy, Idris Elba for Beasts of No Nation, even arguably like Jacob.
He should have got nominated too. Tremblay should have won for Room. Same year, yeah. Tremblay should have won Best Actor.
That's why I said it.
That's what I'm saying. He's so good.
But yeah, anyway, I think Paul Dano again, like it's a mix of his singing and just the emotion that he manages to give. He shows like Brian Wilson being less and less able to control himself, but obviously due to his mental illness, it's shown in a really sympathetic manner.
There's one scene where that really still sticks out to me is when they're like in the studio recording, I think, stuff for Pet Sounds, and just the way Dano is Wilson. Yeah, but just there's just one scene in the studio where like just Dano's working his magic as Wilson, and he's bringing in all these weird stylistic techniques, and no one else in the room can really understand what he's doing, but the fact that it's just all there in his mind it's really scintillating stuff.
I just love the way that the Beach Boys songs are molded into the film, even from like the start, like the opening credits where you have like them shifting through a bunch of the songs like Surfin' USA or I Get Around. They end the movie with Wouldn't It Be Nice, which I thought was a terrific ending. Because it's a movie it's a song that's used in a lot of movies. 50 First Dates, which is a really bad movie, but this this use of that song was really good.
Flips it because it's so often used as just like a really simple expression of joy. Whereas
and then Brian Wilson, like you see some footage of him actually performing. I think it's a titular song. I think the song is called Love and Mercy. I might be wrong. But he's performing like at the end, which I think is such a beautiful way. Because a lot of movies have like ending title cards to show you what happened. But I think the way they did it in this one was super sweet, especially because you see him at such lows at the point that he is when he's played by John Cusack. And also just shout out Elizabeth Banks in this movie. I loved her in this movie.
She doesn't get enough dramatic roles these days.
Now that she's at the high of having directed Cocaine Bear, I think, she can do whatever she wants. And Jacob died. No, I'm not. You were not a fan of that movie at all, right?
No, and I should have me. I love dumb shit. The Beekeeper is one of my favorite movies of this year. But it didn't, I don't know how you fuck up a bear on cocaine, but they fucked up a bear on cocaine. No, she's great. That's Love and Mercy. Anything else to add?
Yeah, honestly, I think, when it comes to the last 10 years, we've gotten so many of these. Like, Elvis, Respect, I Want to Dance with Somebody, even One Love, Michael Jackson movie now coming out. We've got so many of these, but I think it's hard for filmmakers to sometimes remember to like keep the intimacy when you're creating a film about such a big musician and celebrity. And Love and Mercy is one of those that manages to keep that feeling. So, especially if you enjoyed something like Walk the Line or even a Rocket Man, I think like would go hand in hand with this
Rocket
movie
Man is
well.
definitely one of the gold standards for sure.
So yeah, I just think Love and Mercy is an overall beautiful film, and really does justice to its subject and to the wonderful music of the Beach Boys and the journey of Brian Wilson.
Yeah, couldn't have said it better myself. It's one I really want to go back and rewatch as well.
Welcome back to our Paul Giamatti Actor Showreel. And for this segment, we're going to be talking about his newest acclaimed role in The Holdovers. And we're joined today by a very special guest and self-proclaimed Holdovers superfan, Maggie Hill.
Hello, my name is Maggie, also known as at the Maggie Hill online. I make a lot of little videos about TV and film and other storytelling formats. So yeah, I've now seen the Holdovers 9 times, I think, is my record.
9.
Yes.
I was about to ask if you've seen it twice or 3 times,
No.
but 9, that's quite a lot. Could you get more into that? Like where the different instances were that you saw it?
I think at least 6 of them were in theaters. I'll be honest, you don't go into watching the Holdovers 9 times thinking that you will. It's not like the goal. It's one of those things where you watch it and you're like, yeah, I could watch that again. And then a friend wants to see it, so you go see it again. And you're like, yeah, I could watch that again. And then somehow you end up watching it 9 times and loving every second of it.
It was like you had friends who wanted to see it, so you're like, okay, great opportunity to revisit a lovely film.
I think the first 2 times were by myself, and every other time was with a different person.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes a lot. And then where were the other times after that?
It's
out now on digital.
Yes, I own it on Amazon before they put it on Peacock, and I also don't have Peacock, so I was like, good thing I own it. And so I've watched it at home and a friend's house a couple of times because she also wanted to watch it twice, so we watched it twice.
Is that a record times you've seen a movie in theaters?
Probably. Yeah, I'd say so. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Probably not the record amount of times I've seen a movie, but in theaters, yes.
Wow, because it'll take a lot for me to even go a second time to the same movie in theaters.
Yeah.
So
I just got Regal Unlimited recently, so anything I like, I'm just like, okay, I'll go see it again. Hell yeah.
Yeah, I saw it once when I was in the Toronto International Film Festival, and it was absolutely a standout. Like everyone who I was, going to see movies at the festival with ended up putting it very, very high at their ranking. Yes. And then when it came out on digital, I think even on Christmas Day, I watched it at home again and showed it to my parents, and they were really big fans. And basically in this movie, Paul Giamatti plays a character named Paul also, yes. Paul Hunnam, who is a professor at Barton Academy, which is a private boys' school. And he's tasked with watching over the kids who are, staying over the Christmas break, because, he's kind of the most bitter and uptight of the teachers. So
I like to say curmudgeon-y. Really I like to say curmudgeon-y. That's my favorite.
Curmudgeon. I don't think I've used that. I've ever heard that word used before.
Curmudgeon is like a grumpy old man. And so if you call someone a curmudgeon, it's exactly the vibe of Paul Hunnam.
That's fair. Yeah, and then he forms a very unlikely friendship with Angus Tully, played by Dominic Sessa. So let's get straight into it. What do we love so much about this movie?
Oh God. I love the discussion of academic knowledge and experiential knowledge, if that makes sense. Where you can know a lot of things and you can understand a lot of things logically about how the world works. But it's the people you live in the world with and the relationships you make and the conversations you have that actually are what make a life lived. And that it's important to have both because it's the historical understanding of where you are, but also the ability to live in that present and build something better than yourself while you're there. And that's why I like it.
Yeah, that's very true. And it's also similar with Paul Giamatti's character in Sideways, because in that, like, all he knows to talk about is wine and
Yeah.
stuff. And this one, again, he's just like very into his academics, but he's
Yes.
kind of like secluded himself from really trying to form meaningful connections with people his age.
Yeah.
So he has this, he's very savage towards the kids, but he's very melancholy,
Yeah.
which is revealed. And I think he's so wonderful in delivering like this, what was the word?
Curmudgeon-y?
Curmudgeon-y guy that's also
Yeah.
just kind of a lovable soul who
Yeah.
needs a little more love.
Love to know him, hate for him to be my teacher.
Perfect. Yeah.
There was the one line he says at the beginning where he's like, but of course that it'll be an average of the 2 grades for your final instead of just a full retake, that I think every time I saw it, my friend and I would just go, ugh, no. Horrible. But saying like we can't let their money make them smart when they're not. Which I think is true, but he goes about it in a real harsh way.
Yeah, I think he goes about his ways because he has this resentment towards the fact that, like, yeah, they could just get through life without learning anything,
Yeah.
just by having rich parents.
Yeah, because I mean, if we spoiler alert, but that's exactly what happened to him at Harvard.
From here on, spoiler alert, but
Oh yeah, sorry.
let's talk. All good. From here on, spoilers. Let's talk a bit about the script in this movie. First of all, I love just the rhythm of the dialogue, like all these words that Paul Giamatti comes up with. You can tell that he's very much like a history teacher that likes to use old-fashioned words.
Well, that's also such a lens that he views the world through, right? Where he's like, I think I went to an event online with the Writers Guild where they did like a talk through the script with the writer. And he was saying that Paul very much sees himself as that sort of tragic Roman hero, right? Like to him, he is living through the Punic campaign. He is living through this stuff. It's just at his emotional level. So the way that he's reacting to the things around him is through that lens of a tragic Roman hero, with this sort of information of the past and present all encircling each other inside his brain, and they get kind of crossed.
Talk about a movie that equally balances being a brilliant comedy and a brilliant drama. There's so many laugh out loud moments. With a full screening, you had so many like hysterical moments in this movie, but then when the characters are actually, at first forced to spend time with each other, but eventually they manage to bond. There's a lot of great drama. And I think definitely Angus comes into the movie with that same sort of like resentment towards everything around him. And then you kind of understand that he just needs a little love too.
Yeah. I don't know if I've ever related to a character the way I relate to Angus Tully.
Wow. Expand.
I was like,
that.
that's me. I saw he did
Literally
his
me.
stupid little speech at the beginning where he tries to get him to let them out of class early. And I fully did that shit in school. I was the kid in the back of the class with the one good grade being like, sir, actually. And I never related to anyone more.
So it was like a fun literally me or like a cringe literally me?
Both. I think because he needs to learn in that movie. That's what makes a character good. And so I think it's fun to be able to see pieces of yourself that you're like, whoa, okay, we need to take a step back, but then ultimately learn that lesson alongside them.
And I think that's why Paul really gravitates towards him, because he's like, hey, I'm alone and maybe I don't always want to be that, but I'll never admit that ever because I'm kind of comfortable.
Yeah.
I'd say like the first 50 or so minutes, he's just very pissed off at him. And then eventually he's like, okay, I got to take care of him.
And I find that so much of it is because he sees his own flaws in this kid, which I mean, like me talking about Angus a second ago, it's hard to look at this person and be like, oh, I know exactly why you're doing, but because it's a reflection of me, it's annoying. Like, why are you being me back at me? That's rude. So there's an immediate sort of like defensive anger to that and a defensive annoyance to that. And you have to annoy the other person enough that they put down their boundaries. And I think the first moment that really happens is when Angus lies for him at the doctor's office. because there's 3 lies in the movie. This is something the writer talked about. You have that lie, you have the Harvard lie, and then you have the lie at the very end that Paul says. And so rule of threes in writing, woo woo. But also it's such a good progression of like what they do for each other.
Definitely how far they come for each other throughout is really sweet. And then, of course, there's one other person who's staying with them the whole holiday, and that's the character of Mary Lamb, who's played by Davine Joy Randolph.
Who, if she does not win that Oscar, I will riot. I will riot.
She has her own arc and her own story that's very much put forward and not defined by the other 2 characters. But she's also there as the voice of reason, even though she's gone through like the worst thing imaginable. She has those funny moments too, but it's really like, I think, the patience in her performance that's really brilliant. Like she's going through the hardest holiday season she's ever been through and still trying to be a caregiver of some sort.
I think too, she's so unabashed about her grieving, where she's afraid to heal, but she's not afraid to grieve. And she's very herself, no matter what. There are moments where Paul looks to her for help and she's like, you did it, you fix it. Or like a tough love kind of like, hey, I got my own shit. Like, love to help you, love you guys, here for you. At the same time, like, I'm here for you as my own person and not just as the woman who's going to help you out.
Exactly.
Yeah. Which I was very worried about her falling into at the beginning. I was like, oh, is this going to be like the mama situation? But I was like, no, like this is a woman going through her own pain, living her own struggle and finding her own version of healing in this story. And it is not solely dependent on the men in the movie, which I loved. It is entirely her own choice and entirely her own journey.
We see Paul Hunnam in the beginning. He's a dick to everyone for the first act. But he's always very respectful too. Like he's complimenting her cooking.
And she's like genuine. Yeah.
He's like super chill with her all the time. But
I think it's a thing of he is respectful to people he feel deserve his respect. Like she is a great worker. She is kind. She does she is living as a full person who demands that respect and that authority. And so he gives it. Because he's like, yeah, you're another adult. Here we are, all these kids, Yeah,
because everyone else in that world is like, we at Barton, we honor our founders, our academic values and all that. And he knows that all these people are BS. She's actually, fought for a life and so on. And that's a very good point, that he knows that she's earned that respect from him. But yeah, she has so many just fantastic moments that as soon as I saw this movie back in September, I was like, she's at least getting nominated.
Oh yeah. There's a single shot of her at the party where the music is playing and her eyes follow the music. She goes through 3 different memories. The memories turn sour. She starts to cry. She looks up and sees Danny, the caretaker, and goes, get me another drink. It is like a 10-second push in. And it is some of the most beautiful work I saw all of last year. Was that 10 seconds?
Yeah, and it's, I think anyone who watched a lot of movies this year, A, saw this one, B, said that this was one of the best performances of the year.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's such a big part of the story, even though she also has her very own story within the film.
Yeah, and I think too with her son, something I think about a lot with this movie is that none of it happens without Vietnam. Because Vietnam, funnily enough, in American history is something they don't like to teach you, right? Like they skip over it. They're like, yeah, a bunch of people died. Oh no, see you later. Because they don't want to talk about how culpable they were in the massacre of the working class at the time. And so you have that whole scene where they're coming out of the diner and Paul is like, Barton boys don't go to Vietnam except for Curtis Lamb.
I was about to say that.
Yeah.
And in Paul's delivery of that line, except for Curtis Lamb, you can hear the immense respect he has.
And the anger. That this kid, of all kids, this wonderful, hardworking, smart kid, was sent because of money. And in the same way, you wouldn't have Angus's conflict, because Angus is like, if you talk about, okay, what happens if Angus wins? What happens if he loses? His loss is death, because he gets sent to military school, then gets sent to Vietnam, then dies. And Paul's entire viewpoint of the world, every monologue he gives about the world being on fire, no one giving a shit about the poor kids, is because of Vietnam. So like every single character's central conflict in this movie hinges on that war and what it did to the working class of America.
That's powerful. And I think it also like goes to one of our other themes of like, what are these Barton boys really being taught, if not about the realities of what's actually going on in our country, if they just kind of get to live in their own world.
Yeah. Well, but no one in America is taught about what's going on in America. You get up to World War II and they stop. And they're like, and we're good.
And MLK had a dream.
Yeah, and that's all you get.
Yeah, exactly.
So I love this movie. Helped a lot of times when I saw it with friends, it started a conversation and we got to have like a whole discussion about it, and like our perspectives on what history has been taught to us and what we've learned and what we believe. And like, I think that's a really interesting starting point, is such like a human movie to enter into what should be understood as a human conflict.
Another thing that really contributes to the mood of the film is the 70s style editing of it. Like Alexander Payne is so unapologetic about him wanting this to feel like a 70s movie.
Yeah.
I also just think it's his best directed movie I've seen.
Oh,
I've seen
the blocking in this fucking movie is incredible. You will have a single take with like 7 different visual blocking images between actors that give you the emotional stakes, understanding, and relationship without a single word, like 7 times in one take. It's crazy. The liquor store scene, that's all a one shot.
That always comes to mind when I'm thinking about their relationship.
But it pits them across from each other at the top here. Angus is trying to push a little more, so he walks around and follows. Paul turns away because he's emotionally turning away and physically turning away. He goes and searches off screen. Angus follows. He's pulled back in by Angus, makes another retreat. Like, it's a whole choreography to their emotional relationship in a single scene, and it's incredible.
That's, I think, the most open he is to Angus in maybe the whole movie, because he's obviously telling something that he's embarrassed to tell and hasn't told anyone in years, and he's telling it to the person he thought he would never be spilling the beans to. And he's like, I hit him. Like, I love Paul's delivery in this movie and just their chemistry, their partnership.
Oh my God, yeah.
But again, like the direction, the production value throughout the movie. And
I think it's crazy that that's like 7 different schools.
Oh, they filmed it in 7 different schools?
Yeah, around.
That's crazy.
There's a bunch of different schools in Massachusetts. I think, so one was the school that Dominic Sessa went to when they cast him. And then another one of them was actually Paul Giamatti's high school rivals.
That's funny. He must have meant it then, if they filmed that where he was spitting the liquor. Yeah. He must have meant it. I think the ending is such a touching scene, because it's like, you know, like you said, it's Paul lying for all the right reasons.
Yeah.
He's realizing, like you said, maybe experiential wisdom is what he needs now, and that doing this for a kid that he genuinely believes in and sees a lot of himself in is the best thing that could come out of his career, even if it ends his career at Barton.
Because he's saving himself. He's saving the kid that he would have been, and he is, one, genuinely saving his life, and also saving Mary from having to go through that again, of another person that she's opened her heart to being sent to the same place. It wouldn't be a happy ending if Paul had stayed at Barton, because he needed to leave. He needed to be more than Barton.
Yeah, because he was just gonna go through that again if he had stayed. All you kids suck, etc., etc. Like, he wasn't gonna do anything that the teachers would randomly be like, "Oh wow, Paul, you're not so bad after all." Like,
well, it's also all the other teachers sucked, dude. Like, it's not a group of people. All the values that he fought for no longer reside there to him in his mind, right? Because he has that asshole as a headmaster who doesn't really care about the kids and cares about the money and his spot and his fancy bourbon. And he needed to be like, I've dreamed about seeing these places and these things for so long. Let me not only give younger me, Angus, the ability to continue pursuing his smarts and his dreams, but let me finally go and pursue mine.
Absolutely. And of course, we have to end it with some sort of savagery because it's an Alexander Payne movie.
It's
So
a bit of
he
a
drinks
fuck
the
you.
cognac and he spits it on the.
You got to give a fuck you to the headmaster. One last one.
With that, let's get into some Oscar chances.
Yes.
The Holdovers is nominated 5 times for Best Picture, Best Actor, Supporting Actress, Film Editing, and Original Screenplay. Let's talk about the easiest one, Supporting Actress. It's looking really good.
If she loses, I will be so upset.
Yeah, that would be pretty sad. It seems like everyone's sort of in agreement, like, yeah, she's the best one. Plus, I think the moment she won the Golden Globe and the Critics' Choice, I just think this is the easiest acting one to predict this year. I think each year, at least, there's a lot.
I'm going to be so honest with you. The only one I care about.
Yeah.
I do not care about the Oscars. I care about Joy Randolph winning that Oscar.
Yeah. I mean, it's likely going to be one of the big moments and a very well deserved one. Like I'm excited to see her win. I'm excited to see her speech. Like it's honestly looking like a good 99.9% that she's going to win because it doesn't seem like there's anyone who's really giving her a run for that gold right now.
Mm-hmm.
On that subject, I do think Alexander Payne should have been nominated for directing.
I do as well.
Is interesting because he's been nominated 3 times for directing.
Interesting.
Like even when some of his movies got less nominations, he was still nominated for Sideways, for Nebraska, for The Descendants.
Yeah.
And he's won twice for writing, never for directing. But considering this is like everyone thinks this is one of his best, it's interesting that he missed out on this one. Original screenplay, I think it has a shot at winning. Yeah. But I think it's like split 3 ways now between this and Past Lives and Anatomy of a Fall.
Oh, also very good. I don't know. I think it'd be cool if he won David, last name I can't remember, because yes, he was a TV writer. So this is his first feature that's been produced. And I love TV writers, if you didn't know from my content. So I'm really always excited when someone like makes that jump and succeeds.
And then last but not least, Best Actor. Paul Giamatti has so far taken home the Golden Globe and the Critics' Choice. Yes. So he won the Golden Globe for comedy. Cillian Murphy won for drama. So it looks like they're sort of pitted up against each other now. I think Giamatti has the edge for me because I love Cillian Murphy and Oppenheimer, but I think it would be lovely if Giamatti won just because he's such a terrific character actor, as we've talked about in this whole episode. And I think honestly, the voters might be waiting to give him his due. He's been working so long and he's done so many films that people love. I think this would be a great moment.
Also, just as a person, listening to his podcast and interviews, like the way he thinks about acting and is kind toward craft and apparently delightful to work with and so thoughtful and naturalistic in this role. I just want him to win. And I want to see that little smile on his face. And I want to post it on my little Instagram story. And that's how I want my night to go.
In his Golden Globe speech, he was like, I want to shout out my son who just finished college. And I was like, hey, just finished college.
Me too. Woo!
Hey, awesome. Because a lot of the time is like they're giving really heavy dramatic transformations to the roles. This one is a very much a mix between comedic and dramatic. I think it would be slightly different from the ones that have won Best Actor recently, but I don't think it's any less deserving just because he's giving it his all. Again, I think he's built up such a rapport and so many of his colleagues admire his work, I'm sure. And, doesn't seem like Bradley Cooper is taking this one home, even though he's been nominated a dozen times because he hasn't won any of the past ones. But look, we'll have to wait to see what the SAG.
For Maestro.
That'd be interesting. It looked like it for a second. I don't know. But
we'll see.
Yeah, I think with the current wins, Giamatti is now in the front runner spot. So I'm waiting to see what happens with the SAG Awards, but I'm going to echo that and say let the man win. I just think it's going to be a fun win and a deserving one, and just love the guy. Rooting for him right now.
What a man. What a man. Let him win.
I think it's also the movie this year that I can just recommend to everyone with pride. Like,
Um,
if you don't like violent movies, maybe don't watch Killers of the Flower Moon or something. But
mhm.
this is just a movie that's A, warm, B, funny, C, emotional and intelligent. Like,
Yeah.
I could recommend this. A, I watched it with my parents, or to my grandparents. To I have
Mhm.
friends who have seen it and loved it, who aren't
Yeah.
even that into movies. So just a easily watchable and accessible one that everyone can find something in.
Watch The Holdovers. That's my only closing thought, is that if you haven't watched it at this point in your life, what are you doing? Turn it on right now. Free trial, Peacock. Let's go.
So we've talked about some great films in which Giamatti does a variety of different things, and we've watched him dominate the awards talk with his great turn in The Holdovers. I want us to do our top 5 Paul Giamatti performances, and I'd like to start with you.
One other movie I want to shout out is this Tom McCarthy movie called Win-Win, where I think it's sort of like a training run for the Holdovers. He plays like a lawyer who teaches a high school wrestling team, and he ends up this kid ends up coming under his care through these circumstances, and it's just about him sort of bonding with
That does
this
sound like
kid.
the pilot for the
Yeah,
Holdovers.
definitely. It's not like a great film, but it's really sweet, and Giamatti is very good. And one other last one I'll shout out and I'll mention, just because no one's seen it and I think it's underrated, is this film called All Is Bright, which is this dark Christmas comedy starring Giamatti and Paul Rudd as a couple of burglars. And I think it's a really, really underrated film. And Sally Hawkins plays a Russian woman in it too, which is worth the price of admission alone.
So Giamatti's playing a scumbag in this one?
Yeah, him and Paul Rudd playing scumbags, and Paul Rudd has a great beard in it too, I think.
And I haven't seen this one, but you said you liked him in, well, maybe it's on your list, but you said you liked him in American Splendor.
That's my number 5. So thank you for the segue there. And we're talking performances, not films necessarily. My favorite film is he's in is Saving Private Ryan, which he's in for about 5 minutes, but I digress. American Splendor. I don't think Gal's seen it, but I watched it recently to prep for this. He plays this famed cartoonist, but he was this real misanthropic, depressed guy, and it's sort of a mishmash of documentary and biopic. So in that regard, it's a really unique biopic, and Giamatti's great. It's one of his few lead roles, and his character's lovable and interesting, but also like kind of gross and a smelly loser. But you come to love him by the end. My number 4 is Straight Outta Compton, which we have talked about. Again, while the film's not about him, I really do think it is one of the highlight performances in his career. Because again, he starts out so trustworthy and then just bit by bit goes off the rails as you realize he's exploiting them. My number 3 is Cinderella Man. We've talked about that to death. My number 2 is Sideways. As much as I don't love the film, I go like the fact that he's the only thing about that movie that didn't get an Oscar nom, it feels personal at that point.
Yeah.
And my number 1's The Holdovers. I think it's his best performance, and a perfect grace note on a long career that I'm sure has a lot of great movies still to come.
Yeah, so my number 5, I decided to go with Straight Outta Compton, just because, all the things that you said, Jerry Heller seems kind of trustworthy at first, and then he goes completely off the rails. And he just has so many great rants. He has so many great rants in that movie. Number 4, these are kind of interchangeable, but Love and Mercy I picked just because I think it's a film that like the performances are so personable. But I feel like 5 and 4 are kind of interchangeable because he's really great in both.
The only reason I don't have Love and Mercy is that I haven't seen it in like 9 years, so I just remember the other ones more.
There, and then 3 is you know what? Screw it. My top 3 is your top 3. So number 3, I went with Cinderella Man, which he's excellent in. 2 is Sideways, which is, his best leading performance, until number 1, which is The Holdovers. I think it's such a career-defining performance. And I think we should talk a little more about that now that we know it's both our number 1s, what we love about him in The Holdovers.
Yeah, again, it's one where if I was voting for Best Actor at the Oscars, I would vote for Cillian Murphy, but I would still be overjoyed if Paul Giamatti won that Oscar. He's definitely my second favorite of the nominees. And the fact that it's looking like a 2-horse race between those two, I'm a happy guy, whatever happens. Yeah, it's delightful. It's like Payne's dedication to the old school filmmaking techniques really come through. And Giamatti's just a lovable curmudgeon grump teacher who sort of learns to let love in is not a new type of film, but Giamatti just plays it so well, and with so many great like creative insults and unique little character traits. There's so much depth to his character and performance. Like the lazy eye, my friend actually noticed the second time we watched it that they switch which eye is the lazy eye from scene to scene, which just adds so much more to that gag at the end of like Sessa not knowing which eye it is.
You know, Bradley Cooper, Coleman Domingo, Paul Giamatti, and Cillian Murphy would all be deserving of taking home that trophy. But now that it's looking like it's between Cillian Murphy and Paul Giamatti, I would honestly love for Giamatti to win, because there's something so like human about his performance, something so close.
He's the only performance in that category that's not based on a real life person, which like more
Jeffrey Wright, but
no, not based on existing IP. Sorry, that's based on a book. It's the only completely original film character in the category. So we need more of that in this category, I think, rather than people just dressing up as real life folks. But yeah.
As soon as I saw this movie in September, she was the one on my mind, Divine Joy Randolph. Yeah. Where I was like, she should get nominated for supporting actress. And as the rest of the year went by, I was like, oh, no one's better than, yes, go Divine Joy Randolph. And she's so amazing.
I think it could win screenplay too. I think that's a genuine 3-horse race. But if I had to bet right now, I think I would say the Holdovers wins.
Interesting. I think Anatomy of a Fall or Past Lives both have a slightly better edge, but I wouldn't be surprised still if the Holdovers won, just because it's such a good script.
I think just looking at the films themselves, I think Holdovers is most likely. But then I think what gives Anatomy and Past Lives an edge is that they're written by the directors, which they often go for, whereas the Holdovers isn't written by Payne. And like, if they don't know who David Hemmingston is, maybe like, I want to give it to Celine Song or something. So it's going to be a really good race.
Yeah, that's both screenplay categories this year are so exciting. So that concludes our Paul Giamatti Actor Showreel. And I'd just like to thank Jacob again for co-hosting this episode with us. And we'd like to thank Paul Giamatti for his great body of work and for giving us such a wonderful performance this year in the Holdovers.
For his iconic role as Marty Wolf in Big Fat Liar.
Exactly, which I will now have to watch. Jacob, where can we find you all over the internet?
You can find me on Instagram at Jacob Watches Films. That's where I post everything I'm doing. And follow my podcast. I have a podcast called The Film Draft. We just hit our 30th episode. We're also on Instagram there, and you can find us on Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcast. Gull's been on 3 episodes, so maybe listen to one of those ones if you want a jumping off point. A blast. But it's really fun.
Thanks again, Jacob. Thank you to our guest, Maggie Hill. And thank you guys for watching. And stay tuned for more Oscar coverage coming. Stay tuned for more Oscar coverage leading up to March 12th. I messed that up again. Stay tuned for more Oscar coverage leading up to the big night on March 10th. And of course, more film and TV related content here on Feature Fanatics.